Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to pay a long overdue visit to one of the finest museums in the world, and it's right here under our nose, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They have a wonderful collection of furniture, and recently I spotted a piece that I thought would be just right for the New Yankee Workshop. So we're off to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston next, right here in the New Yankee Workshop. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston is one of the great treasure houses of the world. Built in 1876, it houses over 450,000 objects, many of them priceless. They have a great collection of French Impressionist art, and one of my favorites is the Egyptian collection. I took my daughter here when she was in high school for a project. They have dozens of mummies. They even have a golden bed. Now take a look at this painting. Do you recognize that character? If you said Paul Revere, you'd be right. So Elliot, what's Revere thinking about?
Copley painted him holding this unengraved teapot, thinking about what he might put on it.
Elliot Davis, your chair, Arts of the America. Not only do you have this painting, but you have some of Revere's silver, like this bowl.
We have this superb Liberty Bowl of 1768, and Revere engraved all of the names of the 15 Sons of Liberty, who together drank from this punch bowl and sealed their pact to oppose the oppressive British Townsend Acts of 1767.
What a great story. So you have the painting, the bowl, do you have the table?
We have lots of great colonial furniture here. Do you recognize this desk and bookcase in the center here, Norm?
Goddard Townsend, perhaps?
You're right. They're the great colonial craftsmen from Newport who produced this beautiful block and shell front.
You know, whenever I see a piece like this, I am in awe of the craftsmen who built it. It's just gorgeous.
Well, we're really fortunate to have such superb pieces of American furniture here. Let's take a look at another masterpiece built about 25 years later. I brought you here, Norm, to show you this incredible semicircular commode that was made for one of the wealthiest families on the North Shore of Boston for their bedroom.
Wow, that's quite a piece. It has these columns, all that nice carving, and look at the top. Is that all marquetry or is some of that painted?
Well, we have some inlay and some veneers, and at the back there's a beautifully trompe-l'oeil painted scene of shells sitting on a bed of seaweed.
Wow, that's great. I would have loved to have seen the bedroom that this was actually in.
Well, unfortunately, I can't show you those rooms today, but we can take a look at one of the other groups of furniture in context in one of our vignettes.
That'd be great.
I've brought you here, Norm, so we can take a look at some furniture that was built about 75 years later. It's all ebonized and in the aesthetic style.
So this is as it would have actually been seen in a room.
That's right. All of the furniture, the wallpaper, the ceramics, the glass, and the paintings were meant to complement one another.
We have furniture scattered all over the museum. It would take hours to see it all.
That's right, but not for long. Soon we're going to be featuring all these masterworks of American art under one roof in the new American wing that we're building.
That'll be great. Now, some of these pieces look like they just came out of the craftsman's workshop. Is that always the case?
Not at all. We often have to take a look at them in the lab for greater analysis and often conservation. I'd really like you to meet Jerry Ward, our senior curator of decorative arts. He'll take you on a visit in the lab.
Oh, that would be great. Well, Jerry, it looks like you have just about everything up here in the lab.
Well, there's always a good mixture of things, but what I really wanted to show you was this blanket chest in our collection, our so-called Taunton Chest, made in Taunton, Massachusetts, just south of Boston in the in the 1720s, and attributed to a craftsman named Robert Crosman of that area, who made about 22 of these that have survived. Ordinary forms, but embellished with wonderful painted decoration of the kind that you see here, with trailing vines, birds on some of them, or many of them, not all of them, and so forth.
And how does it actually function?
Well, it's basically a large cavernous chest.
Okay, just a box.
Depth of 2 simulated drawers, and then it has a functioning working drawer down below.
Now, why do you think they went to so much trouble to make it appear that there were 2 more drawers up?
Well, probably a couple of reasons. One is the chest of drawers was a more stylish, forward-looking form than the blanket chest, so it has the appearance of the new while retaining the comfort of the old, and it's less expensive to make 1 drawer than 3 drawers.
That makes sense. Anything special about these brasses?
The brasses were probably imported from England. They seem to be, at least they're old and probably original to this chest, and the lock escutcheons are also probably original.
Did you just get this piece?
No, this came in 1932 as a bequest of Charles Hitchcock Tyler, a great benefactor of the museum. We began to reinvestigate it about 6 or 8 months ago when a fabulously important dated example was coming up for auction that caused quite a stir in the New York antiques market. That led us to get this out of storage and reinvestigate it, and I think eventually we'll clean it up and put it on view.
All right, so you want to get it out so the public can see it again?
Absolutely.
Well, I like it. I like the size of it. It looks like it's made out of pine. I think the woodworkers in our audience would enjoy building something like this. So if you don't mind me taking a couple pictures and maybe helping me get a couple measurements, that would be great.
Our pleasure.
When you look at a chest like this, it's hard to believe that one like it sold at auction for millions of dollars. That chest and the one we saw at the museum were both built by Crosman over 275 years ago. They had the original finish. The decorative paintwork on the front was extraordinary. And best of all, the one that sold at auction was signed and dated by Crosman. Let's take a look at the woodworking. It's not that difficult. The top I've made out of 3 boards glued together. Crosman's was a single pine board, something that we couldn't find today. It's hinged with these cleats on the edges that are chamfered and nicely shaped. The chest itself is made of full thickness 3/4 inch boards, rabbet at the corners for a nice strong joint. And when you look at the front, you see 2 simulated draw fronts outlined by these half-round moldings, and 1 operable drawer. The hardware is very similar to what was on the original. Drop pulls, and they also have these escutcheons which I'll apply after the finish is on. Now today we're going to build a slightly different version. Instead of a chest, we're going to build a dresser with 3 operating drawers. So if you'd like to build one or the other or both, there'll be a measure drawing available, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. There are several glued up panels in the project. These 3 boards will make up the top. Right out of the lumberyard, the joints are pretty good, but I can make them better. So I'll head over to the joiner. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. A couple passes on each edge should clean them up. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm going to cut some slots for some biscuits to reinforce the joint. These biscuits will align the piece and give it some strength. Now I'll make a couple dust frames. I'm going to need a dust frame to support the top drawer and the middle one in the chest that we're building. Let me show you how that's going to work. The frame will be connected with a mortise and tenon joint. Here's a sample made out of plywood. There's a groove that's going to go in the long pieces and a tenon that will go in the short connecting pieces. I'm going to make my dust frames out of poplar. I've set up the dado for a 1/4 inch width, 1/2 inch height. I'll run the piece through, which will give me a groove that's almost perfectly centered. However, if I turn it around and run it through again, I'll get a groove that's absolutely centered, maybe a little bit wider, but I can make up for that when I form the tenons. To form the tenons, I've widened the dado and installed the sacrificial strip. By pushing the piece through with 2 passes, I'll get the tenon formed to the right thickness. I ran a sample to make sure the setup was correct. And when the tenon is formed, I just want it to be a slip fit. Not too tight, not too loose. In order to make the dresser we're building look as much like this piece as possible, I'm going to rabbet out the front edge of the dust frame so that I have a 1/2 inch of material remaining. And then I'll cover that with the 1/2 inch half round. This rabbet will also act as a stop for the drawer front. For the assembly of the dust frames, I'm going to glue the front mortise and tenon together. However, the back mortise and tenon I'm going to leave loose. And the reason for that is the sides are solid wood panels. And by leaving this loose, it'll be able to move back and forth as the panel expands and contracts. If we take a look at the prototype, and look at the side panel, we see that it's another glue up. At the bottom, I have this cutout, this arch, which forms legs. Over on the work table, I've laid out that arch on a couple more panels, and I've also laid out for some dados. There's going to be one for the bottom panel and two for those dust frames that I just made. I also want to have a rabbet down the back edge to receive a plywood back. We'll make the rabbet first. To make the dados for the dust frame in that bottom panel, I'm going to use the table saw. Of course, I could also make those grooves using a router and a straight edge. The key to doing it on the table saw is to have a table saw surface that's very slick, as well as the edge of the fence. That way the piece won't catch as I push it through. I'm going to keep my eye right along the fence where the wood meets the fence, keeping it tight all the time as I push it through. Well, now's a good time to cut some pockets for pocket screws. Since there's no frame at the top edge of the side panels, I'm going to attach the sides to the top with the pocket screws. This little jig guides this drill bit. The thick portion will drill the pocket, the small shank will drill the pilot hole. Now I'm beginning to assemble the carcass. A little bit of glue in that dado, and this is the bottom panel, which is a full shelf. Clamp it as needed and secure it with some brads. The gluing for the dust frame is a little different. I'm just applying glue to catch the end of this front piece and to catch this back rail. No glue along this piece. This would be cross grain. When the piece is installed, the front will be locked in position, the back will be locked in position, and this little gap here will allow for movement of the piece as it expands and contracts. I'm going to temporarily apply some clamps to make sure that that frame is fully seated in the groove. The back of the case is a piece of 1/4-inch plywood. It'll keep the dust out, and it adds a lot of strength to the case so it can't rack. Here I'm taking a piece of poplar and chamfering the edge with my chamfering bit. After it's chamfered, I'm going to rip it to width, and then I'm going to apply it to the bottom shelf of the unit. A little bit of glue on both surfaces, and I'll hold it in place with these edge clamps. This is the panel for the top of our chest. I want to round over the two ends and the front edge on the bottom with a 1/8 inch radius, and on the top with a 1/2 inch radius. For the top edge, I'm using a 1/2 inch roundover bit. I've installed it in the router table because I don't have a lot of surface area for the guide bearing to run on. This way I'll just use the fence. Here I'm using a rabbeting bit to make a 3/8 by 3/8 rabbet on the back edge of the top panel, and that will allow me to lock it in to the plywood back. All right, bring the plywood into the rabbet we just made. Flip the cabinet so that it's flush to the back, and I can secure it now with some pocket screws. Well, there's only one more thing I want to finish tonight, and that's to finish nailing off the top edge of this plywood. Tomorrow we'll put the cleats on the ends, the half rounds on the front, and make a few draws. And we'll also introduce you to an artist who's going to help us replicate the finish that we saw on that antique. Well, good morning. I got started today working on a couple cleats that go on the underside of the top. There are these pieces which have been chamfered using the same technique I used to chamfer this piece, and then I bandsawed the end and sanded it smooth. It's going to go right here along the edge. Now on the antique, I think it helped to hold the top flat. We don't have to worry about that here because it's screwed to the side pieces. However, I will put a little bit of glue right along the middle. I don't want to go the whole length because of the cross grain. And I'll secure it with some brads. Now I want to make some half-round moldings, 1/2 inch half round. I'm going to apply it along the inside edge of the drawer openings and across the front of this dust frame to make it look just like the original. Here at the router table, I've installed a 1/2-inch half-round bit, which will allow me to make the profile in one pass. I've installed this feather board to keep the stock tight to the table. I'm using 1/2-inch stock wider than I need. I'll route each edge and then rip out the pieces. To rip the pieces, I don't want to rip them between the fence and the saw blade because they could get pinched, particularly because they're round. So what I'm going to do is slide them to a mark that I made to the outside of the blade, and I have a zero clearance insert so that the piece can't get sucked through the blade. This is the safest way. Now each piece is going to be different, so I'll have to reset the fence each time. Here's a sample of how the half-round moldings are going to meet. The vertical piece has a V-groove at each dust frame. The horizontal pieces are mitered from each side, so they intersect that V-groove. I'll show you how I make those cuts. I'm going to make the notches first, so I've tipped my table saw blade to 45 degrees. And you'll note that I'm placing my miter gauge in place backwards because I want to keep the flat side of the stock against the gauge as I make the first cut. Now I'm going to turn the miter gauge around because I'm going to have the piece in the other position, and I'll complete the V-cut. Okay, let's see how we did. There's the piece. Here's my sample of the horizontal piece, and that's going to fit nicely. So let's nail them in place. A little bit of glue on the back side. And just making sure I hold it flush with the inside edge. I'll secure it with some 3/4 inch pins. All right, those fit good. Now I can secure them. Now we need to make 3 drawers for the case. And here's a sample of the dovetail joint. This is the side piece that has the tails. These are known as half-blind dovetails because they don't show through the front of the drawer. And it's a very nice look. With this dovetailing jig, I can make those joints and I can space them out in any configuration that I want. At this point, I've installed the drawer front with the good side facing down. The fingers are all adjusted, and the first step is to route out the material between the fingers to form the pins. Okay, now I can remove the drawer front and set up a side to make the tails. To make the tails, which will meet into those pins, I have to flip over the fingers and reset them. Now I've also installed this backer block which will prevent tear out when I route the tails. Now here's the piece I'm interested in cutting. It's 1/2 inch thick, and that gets placed vertically in the jig. Okay, let's see how we did. Just tap it in place. That's going to be good. Let's do the rest of them. Now in the sides, I've just run a 1/2 inch dado, and that's going to pick up the back piece of each drawer. Here's the plywood that I'm going to use for the bottom of my drawers. It's called 1/4 inch plywood, but in fact it's a little less than 1/4 inch thick. That means I can't use my dado to make the grooves in all the pieces to receive that bottom. So instead, I'll use just my saw blade. I'll make one pass on all the pieces, move the fence slightly until it just fits the thickness of the plywood. Well, here it is, the first drawer. Not a lot of clearance. I want it to be nice and tight. I'll show you how I put it together. First, a little bit of glue on the tails and a little bit in the pins. And now I just bring the pieces together and use a block of wood and a mallet to drive it home. Now the bottom. Slips in the groove. No glue. The back is next, and that needs a little glue. and a couple of brads to hold it while the glue sets. The bottom edge of the drawer front on the top two drawers stops against the rabbet in the dust frame. On the bottom, there is no dust frame, there's just a solid panel. So I'm going to make up the difference of that little lap of the drawer front with these 1/4-inch shims. And they go right here on the inside. Now let's see how this last one fits. Ah, that's nice. A little more sanding, and before you know it, we'll be decorating this version of the Taunton Chest. Joining us now in the paint shop is an old friend, Natalie Gardner. Now, Natalie's done a couple projects for us, and one of my favorites is the pier table you did. I mean, that came out great. And you also did a dower chest for us a few years before that. We really like your work. Now, you and I looked at some photographs of the antique that I saw at the museum. What's the formula here?
Norm, we're trying to approximate the color of the original piece as best we can determine it. And I've mixed together several shades of stain in order to achieve that.
Right, and if I recall, the antique was sort of a reddish brown, and it seems like you've accomplished that. So you're covering the whole piece with this oil stain. What's the next step going to be?
The next step will be to cover it with an isolating coat of shellac. This will give me a surface that will protect what's underneath so that I can do hand painting on top of it. In case I want to change something, I can wipe it off without damaging the stain underneath.
Right, because the paint will actually get into the grain of the wood. It's going to sit on that shellac surface.
Yes.
Well, speaking of the decorative work, how are you going to lay that out? Are you going to draw that on this before you paint it? How will you go about that?
I will give a general idea of where I want to locate the major design items. Then I'll freehand in the details because there are a lot of tiny details and there's no need to draw in every single one of those.
Okay, so a general idea and you work from that. Well, we'll be back with you a little bit later to check in on your progress. Ooh, the artist is at work. How's it coming along?
I'm progressing very well, leaf by leaf, feather by feather.
It's starting to look great. So I see that you've basically started with an outline that's in white. I see some of the birds here, and is that just your basic layout?
Yes, I'm using a white watercolor pencil to give myself some idea of the location of everything.
Well, it looks like you're having a lot of fun doing this. I'll stand back and watch you do some more. Natalie, you make those curved lines so effortlessly. If I was doing that, it would take forever, and it would look awful.
Well, you should see how I make a dovetail, Norm.
Natalie, you are good. Now, once we get all this delicate paintwork done, how are we going to protect it?
We're going to put a coat of polyurethane on, Norm, and that should protect it from wear and tear for a long time.
That's great. Well, I must say, Natalie did a wonderful job on all the decorative paintwork. And the drop poles we found are very close to the ones that were on the original. Maybe we should take it back to the museum and see what they think. Nevertheless, it'll be a reminder of that antique that we saw and the craftsman who built it. Now let me show you what we're going to build next time. It's called a bow front chest. It has this nice, graceful bow. And we've never built anything like this before. I'll show you how to make a form and bend these curved draw fronts, as well as complete all the other elegant details of the case. That's the bow front chest next time right here in the new Yankee Workshop.